Good evening, and thank you for joining me. I'm Cameron Ashplant, and welcome to this first edition of Parrhesia News and Debate. The headlines this week. We headed down to Lincolnshire to speak to the mother of a girl who took her own life at Durham University back in 2018.
And it was really, really hard. I mean, I was almost suicidal myself.
Also, our political editor, Abby Cohen, has been in Hartlepool, one of the most impoverished constituencies in the United Kingdom, where she's found out a little bit about what is the target seat for the Brexit party, where she spoke to both locals and the party chairman himself.
I don't understand this Brexit, but it scares me, it really does. That Boris Johnson, he scares me, that's why.
Also on the show today, I'll be joined by our Latin American correspondent. She'll be telling us a little bit about the current protests in Chile, Bolivia and Ecuador too. First tonight, it came as a massive shock back in March of 2018 when former university student Alexandra Wilshaw took her own life. She hanged herself in her student room only days before she was meant to return home for Easter break. Her mother has since set up the Alexandra Awareness Campaign. I went down to Bourne, Lincolnshire this week to speak to her mother, Carol, who talks about her daughter, her best friend.
But we didn't really know that she was suffering because she never told us.
You obviously kept in contact with her and you were really close to your daughter.
Yeah. She was just lovely. Yeah, she was. She was a lovely girl. And turned into a beautiful woman. So for her to do what she did, it was just devastating. Because she was my only child as well.
Were you aware of any issues of anxiety?
Yeah, she did suffer from anxiety and she was on tablets, so I did know about that, but to actually speak to her, or you would never have known anything was wrong with her because she was quite outgoing. You know, she didn't seem that type of person to be anxious because she was always, you know, loud, bubbly, and you just wouldn't have known. So it was just one massive shock. And we were going to pick her up the next day when it happened, to bring her home for the Easter holidays.
Do you think that there is an increase in mental health issues, or do you think it's simply that now people are more open about it?
I think it's a bit of both. You know, I don't remember when I was that age ever feeling as pressured as much as students, you know, young children are now. I think it's the whole society, because when I was younger you weren't expected to go to university, where now everybody is expected to go to university, and it's not always right for some people. You know, and then you've got social media where people are on there constantly and they can, you know, emojis on there like hugs and stuff, but that isn't the same as like a real hug. When your child is away, you don't always know. You know, they can speak to you or text you and be all happy, and as I've found out, it's not always the case.
Did you ever speak to Alexandra about her feelings about her mental health? Or?
Her anxiety, yes. And I used to always, you know, say, "Are you taking your tablets? How are you feeling?" And she would just say she was okay. They hide it really well. So, and she did hide it well.
It was a really hard period you went through when she passed. How did it affect your family and your and how you felt at the time as well as you went through that period?
It was devastating. Absolutely. I've just lost my whole future.
Sorry.
It's okay. And it was really, really hard. I mean, I was almost suicidal myself at the time. And I think what keeps me going is trying to raise the awareness, just to get it out there, so other people don't have to go through this.
Do you ever sometimes wonder what she might be up to today?
I would like to think that she was still with a boyfriend and working on what she wanted to do, which was teaching maths. That's what I would have liked her to be doing. Yeah, she had everything going for her. Whenever I rang her up, she always used to be on about Matt this, Matt that. And, I mean, Matt found her, so he's got to live with that for the rest of his life. And it's awful for him. She didn't leave a note.
If people were to take something from her as a person, her traits, what she contributed, what would you want people to remember her for?
Just being a bubbly, funny, beautiful, bright, clever girl. Because she was. And she had such a good heart. She always wanted to help people that were less fortunate than herself. Just always thought about others. That's really all I can say, you know. We raised £2,000 last year. I did skydive, which is like my worst ever fear because I hate heights. So I actually don't really know how I did that, but I did. And then this year we raised £2,042, I think it was, which has been split between Alexandra's charity and a local charity. Getting the awareness across is my mission, to hopefully help students as well as, you know, spotting the signs of, you know, anybody that looks as if they're struggling, and just making the students aware that it's, you know, it's okay not to be okay, but also if they know somebody else who seems to be struggling, to, you know, as much as they don't want to because it's probably their friend, it could actually to tell somebody, because it could actually save their life. And not, you know, if I'd have known Alexandra had tried before, I would have brought her home. And her friends knew that, and nobody said anything. Where if they had, then I could have stepped in. So I think that another thing they need to do is ensure that if anybody is struggling and they know they're struggling, they need to speak to somebody about it if they've got a friend who's struggling.
Were you not informed of the first?
No, because I don't think the university knew about her first attempt. It was mainly her friends. I found out after she died, and it was in the inquest. It does affect everybody. But hopefully, in the near future, we hope that we can prevent all of it.
If you've been affected by that story in any way, feel free to contact the University Counselling Service. And if you wish to help and support the Alexandra Awareness Campaign, they're always extremely appreciative of that. Next on today's show, we're heading to our political editor, Abby Cohen. She's visited Hartlepool earlier in the week to find out a little bit about the general election. Now, Hartlepool is quite an impoverished constituency, and it's one of the key target seats for the Brexit Party. It's one of the very few seats they can actually win, and it's being contested by none other than the party chairman, Richard Tice. We spoke to both him and some of the locals to hear their views on the upcoming general election.
I'm here in Hartlepool, 26 kilometres outside of Durham City. Traditionally, Labour have held the seat here and in the North East due to their close ties with trade unions and working class support. However, with the upcoming election around the corner, things may change. It's here that the Brexit Party announced that they weren't going to contest many Tory seats, and it's also here that polls suggest that the Brexit Party are going to beat Labour, who've held the seat for the past 55 years. In 2016, 70% of people from the North East voted to leave the EU. The people in Hartlepool feel that they've been suffering. There's high unemployment rates and they feel that they've been left behind. So we're here to talk to them and hear their views. So, did you vote in Brexit?
What is, I've never voted because I've been a criminal, but now I don't know if you can vote now because I've been out in someone for that long, for a year.
No, I think last time there was a local election, the Brexiteers were kind of quite,
It was really close.
they had quite a strong kind of ground game. We know that Parrhesia will be kind of pushing for a Brexit seat in Hartlepool, which I can kind of see why they're angling for that, given the economic kind of downturn, the threat of migration, so to speak, all the rest of it that comes through. So who knows, but I think there'll be quite a hard push between the Brexiteers and the Labour to kind of keep the seat.
Do you mind me asking who you're planning on voting for?
I'm kind of probably going to go Labour.
We were a small island, but we were a strong country. And if we all stuck together, in my opinion, we should be okay.
Yeah.
And if Labour were in, God help us.
So you won't be voting Labour in the next
No,
election?
definitely not. If Labour gets in, because he's not strong enough for a start.
Yeah. You don't want another referendum?
No, definitely not. No. Because there's been too much scaremongering. If we had a referendum now, people are going more towards not voting for a referendum, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's been too much scaremongering over 3.5 years. And there's a lot of minds changing now. Now I don't agree with that.
So if you're not voting Labour, would you mind me asking who you're planning on voting for?
I'll be for Conservative.
Conservative. How do you feel about the Brexit Party?
I think Parrhesia is brilliant.
Yeah.
I like them, man, to be honest. And if it comes to a close majority, for the election, I would like to see and take Parrhesia in and amalgamate them together.
Yeah.
And that way we'll definitely win by the majority, you know what I mean? Because the way it stands now, I'm a bit worried in case Conservatives don't get it.
Yeah.
With all the scaremongering over 3.5 years. So it's just going, but as far as I'm concerned anyway, in the Parliament, I think they're all a load of comedians, the way they go on. They're just trying to better each other. I mean, Scotland, they want to go independent. It won't happen. It won't. I don't think it'll happen because, the people of England and the rest won't let that happen.
Yeah. How do you feel about voting Labour and then maybe getting a second referendum for Brexit?
I think the decision's been made regardless.
I don't understand this Brexit, but it scares me. It really does. Boris Johnson, he scares me, that's why. I think that's what it is. He's trying to get the match up in the...
If you could vote, which party would you vote for?
Against
Brexit.
Yes.
So would you vote
Go
Labour or...
Is that Labour? If it's Labour, yeah.
Yeah, or Lib Dem.
Yeah. I'll go for anyone apart from that one because I don't think it's right at all. The way they're going about it. This Brexit. I just don't know how much is going to be getting in and out from Pete, how much is going out. See on about stopping immigrants on the news the other day as well. What's all that about?
Yeah.
We can't do that, man. It's like fuck America, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're doing it.
Yeah.
Like Trump stopping all the immigrants, so why do that? You know what I mean? It's a free country, England, you know that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's all mixed race. So why stop the nasal sickness from coming in just because of their in power?
So do you think that Labour will have, it could have like a positive effect on the unemployment rate here, which is quite high?
I'm not entirely sure whether it will have a positive effect on the employment rate, because obviously Labour are pushing for a living wage and all the rest of it. But it's getting the investment in from outside businesses and getting the investment into the Hartlepool area in the first place, as opposed to saying, because you said about the Tories, the Tories were always about all the Northern House, the Northern Powerhouse, then they kind of closed down steel mills in Stockton, no mass volume employment all of a sudden over there, whereas over kind of Nissan in Sunderland. So, I think it's going to be quite, a challenge to kind of get that employability if the jobs are here.
Yeah.
So you need a wider investment from outside coming in and providing either kind of building schools, building call centres, getting like digital investment in the area where a lot of it is more manual, labour based.
Yeah. How would you feel if Labour had a second referendum? Do you feel okay about that? Happy for that?
I'd be very happy with that. Obviously, people kind of keep saying that it's okay for the Tories to change their minds when they're voting in Parliament over the Brexit deal, so why can't we have a second referendum?
Yeah.
That more kind of facts have emerged in terms of what Brexit would actually look like. People were voting before for Brexit. It was, we're voting to leave the European Union, and but now we know the wide implications of that tied into trade deals and World Trade Organisations and things as well. So I think now that people are a lot more aware of the wider impact of Brexit and they're seeing it affect them themselves, whereas before it was, we'll vote to leave or we'll vote to stay, and all of a sudden they say, actually if we do leave, this is going to happen, now it's going to affect my jobs, affect my employability, affecting my ability to travel across Europe. Then people are like, I didn't actually vote for this, I voted for something completely different. So.
And how would you feel if the Brexit Party did win in this seat?
I'd be disheartened. I think it would be the big thing, but obviously we're a democratic country, so you've got to accept the decision of the people who are voting.
So you're not really a Farage supporter?
Oh God, no.
No.
People outside of our country came over, it was on the cheapest. And you're undercutting the people born and bred in Hartlepool, all the business people. It's not fair. It's not fair when that happens. And the EU says that they have the right to do it. And I'm all against anything like that.
Okay. Are you satisfied though with your local Labour seat?
No. Why would I be? We didn't get nowhere.
If we carry on the way we are, regardless, we are going to just get worse with employment. It's not going to get any better. I don't think unless there is a change, it has to be a big change.
Yeah.
Brexit has got me scared. Like I'm against it really. I've been against it since day one. Because of Boris Johnson as well. Yeah. I mean, you can't stand that guy. He's just a fool. He really is, and he shouldn't be in power, are we? You know that. Fucking don't become.
It's quite a big business, and he knows about business, and he wants to bring business and wealth to the town. That's his key thing.
Yeah.
He wants to bring business and wealth to the town. And if elected, he'll actually move here.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's already stated that. But he is the man for the town because he can bring wealth. He knows how to bring wealth, and he knows how to bring development and develop the area quicker than most other people.
Yeah, because obviously with such high unemployment rates here.
And the council already is run by the Brexit Party anyway.
Yeah, 10. I saw 10 councillors, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the leader of the council is Brexit man.
What do you think stands you apart from other candidates here in Hartlepool?
Well, look, I mean, Hartlepool has been led by Labour for over 50 years, and yet it's suffered from a lack of investment. And the difference to me is that I've got a 30-year track record of successfully running businesses, small, medium, and large. I know how to get things done, I know how to fix things, I know how to sort things, and that's what we need in Hartlepool. We need to get Brexit done, but also we need to bring money and jobs into Hartlepool, and that is my pledge. And I'm saying to people, listen, give me 5 years, I'll do that, and if I fail, then sack me in 5 years' time. I know I can deliver here. And we control already the Brexit Party here, we control the local council, and they've now just announced their first new scheme of new council homes to be built here in Hartlepool for over 30 years. That's amazing. They've done that literally in the first 3 months, and there's a lot more to come. So we know if we get a Brexit Party MP working with a Brexit-led council, we can achieve huge things for Hartlepool.
You might be the only Brexit Party candidate actually.
Well, obviously we're
within
hoping to get we're hoping to get a number. We've got some really good response here in the northeast. There's so much disaffection with the Labour Party, so no, we're really optimistic. But yeah, we all know it's difficult with first past the post.
Yeah. So you think you can still have an impact even if there are only few of you in
Yeah, definitely.
House of
It's a bit
Commons?
like the DUP. Actually, they had 10 MPs and they had a huge impact. And we think if we can get some MPs, a similar sort of number, then yeah, we could have a really important blocking influence.
And so you are quite behind a no-deal Brexit, is that correct?
Yeah, so what we call a clean break.
Yeah.
Because look, at the end of the day, all Brexiteers want a simple free trade agreement. But given the appalling previous negotiation from Theresa May, the right thing we felt to do was go for a clean break that maximises your negotiating leverage with the European Union. Boris Johnson just recently has said he's just going for a simple free trade deal. We're pleased with that, and he said he won't extend the transition period beyond the next year. So he's actually come our way.
Yeah.
And so that's why we decided not to stand 317 candidates against Conservative candidates.
Yeah.
The good news about that is it takes the second referendum off the table. That's not going to happen. It pretty much guarantees there can't be a Corbyn-led government.
Yeah.
So, but what we need to do is we need to get some seats in the House of Commons so that we can hold the Conservatives to account, so they're not tempted to slip into some of their bad old ways.
Are you concerned that you might split the vote between Brexit Party and Conservatives?
Look, at the end of the day, actually, in these strongly held Labour seats, there's 100 seats that the Conservatives have never won in over 100 years. They've always been Labour, and they'll be Labour for another 100 years, unless someone like us comes along. And what we're hearing on the doorstep, people are very unhappy with Jeremy Corbyn, but they could never vote Conservative, and we give them that alternative. So no, in Labour seats, actually, we think we are the contender in a good number of them.
Wonderful.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
I'm now joined in the studio by our Latin American correspondent, Lindy Lavender, who's going to tell us a little bit about our international story this week. That is the protests that are plaguing Southern America and Latin America in general, from Bolivia to Chile and Ecuador too. Thank you very much for joining us today, Lindy.
Thank you for having me.
So just tell us briefly about the situation in Latin America at the moment. It's a region known for protest, but they're getting quite severe and they're spreading from country to country.
Civil disobedience is deeply rooted in Latin America. It's a form of expression, and it comes from a passionate feel from the people. The fact is, protesting has worked to make some sort of change in the government, as it has with Ecuador now that the problem has been resolved because of the Decree 883, which would increase the cost of gasoline and fuel, and it ignited loads of protests around the country. The government was able to say, we are going to make a deal to break this apart and work together with the Committee of Indigenous Cultures in Ecuador and come to an agreement as to what we're going to do.
Some would say that these riots, they're rooted in not petty but some quite small issues, and then it leads to quite large conflicts that's leading to, or large riots that's leading to quite a lot of costs to human life. Obviously, I think it was the rise in public transport was one of the reasons for the starts of one of the protests. Why does such a small government issue lead to such a large social protest?
Because once some sort of issue arises, everybody wants to jump in with their own issues and their own ideologies in order to put it into a sort of melting pot of ideas to bring to the government. So we're not only looking for the fact that the rise in subway tickets might come into difficulties with people going to work and whatnot, but also the sexual harassment, the problems that are happening, and even police brutality, which also came about during the protests. And that's why the National Human Rights Institute now has over 58 legal actions against sexual harassment and violations, mostly from police, and then over 200 legal actions against torture and criminal injustices from the protests alone. And we're looking at the fact that police are also now abusing human rights due to the fact that they are targeting people's eyes and eyesight. 217 cases of the people that were injured, out of the thousands that were injured, were people who had eye injuries, and loads have gone blind.
Obviously, the main goal for many of these countries is they want to try and change the regime that's in power in these Latin American states. And we've seen it for many years, this change from the alt-right to a more left-wing government in power. Why is there such radical changes between the regimes that rule these countries?
The best way to respond to this, I would say, I would look back to Octavio Paz, a famous Mexican philosopher, who stated that, at least in the Mexican community, but it could be applied to the rest of Latin America, people tend to want radical change instead of change that is made slowly, or instead of pinpointing a specific problem within the government or society. They want to eradicate the entire government altogether and start anew with a different type of government.
Often when you've got a domestic issue such as a protest, one solution to the government's problem, their internal problems, is to try and make an enemy out of someone inside the state or out someone outside of the state, inside or outside of the state. So, for example, obviously you can look at the United Kingdom. When Margaret Thatcher wasn't doing too well, she made a big issue out of the Falkland War. And so, I mean, right now what we've got loads of different countries that have got really severe domestic civil issues, civil protests. Are they going to make an enemy out of each other in order to try and distract from the real issue? Obviously, we know that, for example, the relations between Bolivia and Chile aren't the best. Bolivia have got that deep-rooted, that historical argument about wanting a bit of coastline. I think they're one of the only countries in the world that's got a navy, that's a landlocked state. Do you think that we could see these civil unrests become something more continental and disputes between the states?
I definitely think that when it comes to the idea of an external and internal enemy, it comes from populist undertones that the country has always had since the 1960s, 70s, and 80s with all of the dictatorships, and that just prolonged to kind of via an identity to whomever comes into power. You always pinpoint an enemy. But that shouldn't hinder the relationship between countries, because Latin America in general, even though there could be economic restraints between one country or another, it never even gets close to being a conflict. There's a huge cultural unity within the entire region. So it would never even, I don't think it would develop into being any kind of problem in the future. I think it would be a discussion or some sort of discourse in between a country, but never something to actually worry about.
What will it take to resolve these protests?
Well, we're seeing obviously the different outcomes. You have Chile, who still hasn't come to terms with what's happening. We're in month 2 of the protests. Ecuador has been able to resolve it. And now Bolivia is the most strenuous of all 3, because they've lost their president, who was pushing constitutional limits for a 4th term and then obviously committed electoral fraud. So the results are all very different, and it depends on how far the protests push the government to do what they want to do. Obviously in Bolivia, it's worked to get rid of a fraudulent almost dictator, some people are calling him, but now the protesters are still convoluted in this problem. They're still protesting, even though Evo Morales is now in Mexico.
Well, thank you very much. That's really interesting. That was our international Latin American correspondent, Lindy Lavender. And lastly, on today's show, we have our head-to-head discussion, where we're speaking to people with opposing views or different ideological backgrounds. We're joined today by someone from mainland China and someone from Hong Kong too. As you'll be well aware, there were protests in County Durham, in Durham University, on Wednesday, and this is in reference to the extradition bill. This first came into force back in April of 2019. And the extradition bill basically meant that people from Hong Kong could be extradited back to mainland China. This led to protests as people believed their safety was in jeopardy. But the protests continued despite the fact that back in September, the extradition bill was actually dropped. So we're interested to find out why the protests continue and why they've made it all the way here to Durham University. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And first of all, I just want to find out a little bit about what you think the biggest issue facing Hong Kong and China is today.
Yeah, currently I think the biggest issue is for Hong Kong government is to stop violence and back to social order. Yeah, and that's what central government and the Hong Kong government are making efforts to do. Yeah, that's it.
I think the biggest problem that we have today is the lack of emancipation and the lack of universal suffrage in Hong Kong. This is something that we've fought for, and people in China have fought for back in '89. And this is something that we intend to hold up, and we hope we'll get.
Well, how can the situation be resolved? Whose job is it to actually solve this problem? The Chinese president has mentioned that he doesn't want any international interference from neighbours or NGOs. So whose job is it to solve the problem?
I think now the situation of Hong Kong is quite disappointed by 14 billion Chinese people, but only Hong Kongers Hong Kong can only be rescued by Hong Kongers. I mean, the Hong Kong's future, the Hong Kong's tomorrow is held in the hands of majority of Hong Kong citizens. They are standing out against the violence, against the illegal protests, and I think it's a good sign for Hong Kong.
Do you believe Hong Kong should solve Hong Kong's problem?
Yeah, and it's the duty for all societies of Hong Kong, not just to count on government and the police.
I think that there's quite a few problems there. The majority of people, I think, doesn't follow the landscape that you've just described. The majority of people in Hong Kong want democracy. We want to vote, and we want an independent commission to judge police actions, and that is what we're looking for.
Obviously, you mentioned then, so Hong Kong should deal with Hong Kong's issues, is the way it was described, or the way it was suggested to me. Obviously, the Chinese president's advised against international interference, especially from Britain, being a former British colony, for example. But do you believe that the extradition bill itself, is that not foreign interference in Hong Kong? Is that not the Chinese government interfering in the relations and in the politics of Hong Kong?
I think since 1997, the Hong Kong back to China, the China had give enough autonomy to the Hong Kong governments. They have total different system from the mainland of China, and yeah, they do like that since 1997 until now. I mentioned that only Hong Kongers can rescue the Hong Kong, so I don't think Chinese central government will intervene too much on this issue until it goes desperately.
Sorry, the problem, if I may interject, the problem with the extradition bill is that it undermines the core system proposed by China, in fact, the one country, two systems legislation that we have. It clearly states that Hong Kong has autonomy over certain things, and this law, this extradition bill, is what is going to violate this. So this is the problem itself. So this is China interfering with Hong Kong.
Obviously, the protests could have been dealt with in many different ways. There's different ways to get around your opposal to the extradition bill, but the protests have got very violent in Hong Kong. How can this violence be justified when it's coming at such a cost to property and to the people in the community of Hong Kong as well?
Yeah. Firstly, we all know violence is a wrong approach to solve the problems. And we can see the offensive protesters in Hong Kong now are going on a very dangerous and violent way. And people may have different opinions. You complain about the government's policies, but by no means you can wear masks and helmets and carry on weapons to attack the people, attack the police, and set fires on innocent citizens. I think this is totally crazy. Yeah, like terrorists.
See, the problem is that I'd like to apologize to the viewers today that I have to wear a mask, and this is the problem in and of itself, is that we have to conceal our identity because our safety is actually at risk. And the problem is, we have a problem against violence. Violence is not something that we're for. This we have to make very clear. And people that you've mentioned that set other people on fire, they should be brought to the full justice of the law. This is very important. But the problem is, who watches the watchman? So far, a lot of people have been arrested, and a lot of protesters have been arrested all throughout since the beginning of the protest. But not a single police officer has been in trouble at all. And unless you would say that the police have committed no crimes at all, such as rounding up medical professionals, rounding up people going into first aid, beating protesters, unless the police have done no wrong, who watches the watchman?
I think what you're referring to here now about justice is this whole new idea of the 5 demands, not one less, which is obviously an extension now to the first demands to simply withdraw the bill. The bill's been withdrawn, we all know that. But now what you're asking for is for the protests not to be referred to as riots. You're asking that there's amnesty for the arrested protesters, that there's an inquiry into police brutality and the implementation of complete universal suffrage.
That's correct.
I mean, what kind of concessions can either side make here? Are you going to continue protesting until all those demands are met? And are there any of those demands which you think the Chinese government or the government within Hong Kong could actually implement and actually, negotiate with the protester to actually carry through?
Yeah, you go first.
The most important demand, we'd say, is the demand of universal suffrage. This is something that people have fought for during the Umbrella Movement back in 2014, and just as people in China have fought for back in '89, and that led to the Tiananmen Square massacre. This is something that we have fought for, and people in China, just like we say, one China, that we fought for this. And this is the most important one. And then the second one coming after that would be the independent commission into the inquiry of the problems that the police have done. And these are the two main demands that we'd like to be met.
So obviously you mentioned universal suffrage as the key issue there. Is universal suffrage something that interests people on mainland China too?
Sorry, firstly, I want to say what they are doing now is just like riots. They carry on weapons, attack the police, and 10 people assaulted one policeman, punched the people to death. They are just like riots. And if these people got arrested, so who should pay for the people's death? Who should pay for the damage of infrastructure of Hong Kong? Who should pay for that? I think we can, and for the police, I think they did what they should do. They are keeping the order of the society. They are the one who truly love their place, love our country. And you mentioned that the universal suffrage, I think we should not live in a fantastic political dream world. Even Americans don't have one people, one vote. Democracy is kind of a process, need to be improved by step, not in a violent way. And by the way, democracy is based on our humanity, not the loss of it. Yeah.
So what's the best method, do you think, in achieving that democracy, in beginning that process towards a democratic
I think
republic?
this is an issue need to be back to the tables. Yeah, we need negotiation, but not in a violent way.
But then there's one thing I'd like to add, that democracy and emancipation is not a dream world. Getting a vote and representing your views is not a dream. It shouldn't be a fantastical dream. No, it should be a right. That's what it should be. You should be able to choose who your leader is. And it's a shame that we can't. And people in China should as well. One of our slogans is to free China. You should be able to choose who your leaders are.
Does that democracy interest people in China?
I think it's really naive that Hong Kong protesters are trying to teach 14 billion Chinese how to be citizens. It's really naive. Because how you can ensure to choose one leader all people preferred? I mean, look America, look Trump. Donald Trump is the minority people's president.
Vote him out next time. But at least you get a choice. That's the main thing. A choice is the thing that we're looking for.
I think what's quite an interesting difference between China and Hong Kong is the fact that Hong Kong got a little bit of a taste of some of these liberal freedoms that, what we call liberal freedoms in a lot of the Western world, that maybe China hasn't yet been able to have. You only look at the issue that you raised before of the Tiananmen Square massacre. It's something that people in Hong Kong have access to a greater freedom of speech, a greater freedom of mass media, that maybe you're deprived of in China. Is that not something you think, you know what, I want to know the truth, I want to have a say, I want to enjoy the same freedoms that some people in Hong Kong get to have, but yet China still lacks?
They claim they want freedom, but Hong Kong is always the top one freedom state in the world. I don't know to what extent freedom do you want.
So the freedom that they've got, is that something you idolise in China?
I think they got enough freedom. They got different system from mainland. They got votes. They choose their leaders.
No, we don't. That's why we're protesting. we can't choose our leaders.
No matter how you describe your place as a dark place, it's already the top one freedom state in the world. And
that's not true. And it's not worse. It's not the worst and the less bad. It's that I'd love my brothers and sisters in China. We're one family. Let's all get a vote. Let's all get a choice. Let's get just like the emancipation of women, just like it's the emancipation of people, and not just of Hong Kong, it's of China as well. And I think it's not just a Hong Kong issue. It is extending the spirit of what happened in '89. People in China were fighting for the democracy. They were fighting for freedom. Students just like us. They were in Tiananmen Square fasting until tanks rolled in. And this is the sign that freedom is not here.
Why do you think that rioting, though, is the only method to achieve these emancipatory freedoms?
It isn't. And we've tried it in 2014. We've tried an Occupy Central movement, and that was non-violent. We were sitting there, nothing was happening, and we were just waiting for a government to respond. Months after months, nothing happened. And it's not to say that this has then justified violence. No, violence such as the ones that you've mentioned, burning people on fire, that's not right. You shouldn't do that, and that should be brought to the full justice of the law. But the thing is, you need a vote. You want to vote, and if you can't get it through normal democratic means, you'd have to just wait and wait and wait until the government responds. But if it is a government that will not even respond, perhaps something else needs to take place.
So do you disagree? Obviously, one of the demands, until you stop protesting, is to rephrase the term riots back to protest.
That
But
was.
obviously, they are riots, so we've got to call them as for what they are. They are riots.
So I think that very much depends on the definition of riot. And in this case, we were looking for the redaction of the categorization of riot back in June 12th, when the LegCo was, say, broken into. And this is a riot is a very hard thing to determine. And
I'd say setting fire to a man is probably
you kill the people.
That is very hard, and that should be brought to the full justice of the law.
Is that not part of the movement, and therefore the movement is a riot?
No. So what happens is we are all individuals. This is one of the biggest leaderless movements, and that people are individuals and people act such that we have bad apples in everything, such that we have bad apples in the police, such that we have bad apples everywhere. And these people should be brought in front of the law. And the problem is that it's not whether these people are the problem, it's whoever is suppressing the riots, they are not getting fully accounted. That's why we want an independent commission.
And your question, you asked what concessions may governments make to this situation. I think it's really ridiculous to talk about government's concession here, because the protesters in Hong Kong, they cannot represent the majority people.
How do you find out what the views are of the majority people?
Yeah, it's fact that people come almost 1 million, thousands of people come around, and they claim that against the violence, and they want to back normal in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just interject that the statistics on the polls have shown that 70% of people actually agree that we want a vote. And during one of the biggest protests, 2 million people came out. 2 million. Hong Kong's got 7 million people, and 2 million people came out on the streets to protest. If that is not a majority of the 70%, I don't know what is.
Support has been shown globally for the movement on both sides, people coming in support of the pro-Beijing stance, and also people that support the requests from those in Hong Kong. Like I said, we saw it outside the Billy B, the main library on the university campus, on Wednesday. It's seeping into all aspects of life and even affecting students abroad. But what influence can you really have from here in Durham City?
I think the main thing that we're really trying to push forward is the idea that Chinese censorship is not just coming to people in Hong Kong, and it's coming to everywhere. And we're hoping that the British public can pressure the British government into honouring.
But that's the interference that China have asked against. They've asked, do not interfere in our current affairs. I think the words the Chinese president used was, there will be crushed bones if there is any international interference. He's threatening the start of a war.
What has happened at the beginning was there was something called the Sino-British Agreement, and that agreement has to be upheld by both sides, and that was a historical agreement that was signed by both sides. And so if one side has violated the agreement, you can't just suddenly say we cannot have any foreign intervention, otherwise we'll retaliate, and that you then can just walk away from upholding an agreement. It doesn't work. It's like, imagine as if Nazi Germany broke an agreement and said to everyone, we don't want foreign intervention.
You're willing to start a world war over the freedoms that you want?
This is not a world war. What happens is when China threatens to have a world war, this is a decision made by China. It is when this is the decision made by the violating party of the contract, which is the Sino-British Agreement. And you can't, the bully shouts, what can you do?
What do you think? What
I want to answer your question. I don't see any positive effects in this protesting. I think except damage. The world is moving and China is developing drastically. The mainland people value every minute to run business. The students there are really hardworking in order to find a decent job in the future. But what Hong Kong doing now is trying to destroy their homeland and accelerating their economic reverse. Yeah, they just make the things worse. And I don't see any positive things here.
I agree that people in China do work very hard. And we are one China. That is an inalienable fact. And what happens then is that we want a vote just like we believe China would want a vote. We want a free China. And that, your prosperity and our prosperity, that's all great. But democracy has to be in place to ensure that a future dictator or a future problem in politics doesn't happen, that we can have the people's will.
From my perspective, democracy is a process, need to be improved step by step, not in that way.
And at what point of that process do you think China and Hong Kong are at the moment? Have they begun that process of democratization?
Yeah, we will leave that to the leaderships.
So we haven't, and that's the main problem. That's why we are protesting. We want to at least, like you said, start this process. It is not going to be overnight that we're all going to get our votes, that Hong Kong's going to get a vote for. We can finally get a vote for our chief executive, you can finally vote for the president of China. But no, you're right, it is not an overnight thing. It is definitely a process, but let's start it now.
After 2047, the relationship between China and Hong Kong will be brought back into question. Under the basic law, you've got some degree of sovereignty at the moment. Now, it could go three ways in 2047. It could retain the current position, the current status quo of some degree of sovereignty, some individual rights, and self-determination, or it could go down the route of reintegration into China fully, or it could become, or it could take a different form. What do you think the relationship between China and Hong Kong will look like after 2047?
It's very hard to tell, but what we'd like to do is, the reason why we're having protests now is if we can start this democratic process, not only in Hong Kong, and if China could follow suit as well, that we can actually have a democratic, unified China.
I think the relationship between Hong Kong and mainland, they have never changed. Hong Kong is always subordinated to China, it's part of the China. Actually, even before the 1997, before Hong Kong back to China, we have connected closely, no matter in economic ways or cultural dialogues.
And now we are even closer than any period of the history. I mean, you can think of the developing and the development of Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai, Greater Area Bay, and the Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai bridge, the greatest bridge in the world, has ever officially been worked for more than a year. Yeah, we are even closer than that, and I think this relationship won't be changed and it mustn't be challenged. One country and two systems. And after you said that after 2047, we can't say it's impossible. We can't say it's impossible to back to one country, one system. I'm not gonna say that. We will leave that to the leaderships. I think the governments will.
To the leaders or to the people?
To the people and to the leaderships. I think governments will make decisions for good for both Hong Kong and mainland. Yeah.
I'll give you a chance now just to say
and now we just wish Hong Kong to back normal as soon as possible.
I'll give you a chance to take some concluding statements from both sides, and we'll start first with yourself.
I mean, I'm very glad that you agree with the one China, two systems, the one country, two systems idea, because that means that you're actually against the extradition bill, because that violates that. And I'm very glad that you also agree that the people should have the vote. And I think the purpose of our discussion here is actually been achieved. It's the idea that one China could get a vote. And I think that is the most important thing. Getting universal suffrage, getting an independent commission into the inquiry of the police brutality. These are the two main things that are very important. And I think we've made a very important milestone here, having you agree that we should also have democracy in China.
And for me, I think firstly, the most important thing is to stop violence and back to normal. And secondly, about the needs of protesters, I think we should talk about that at tables, not in a violent way. We definitely should stop the protesters from killing people and set fires everywhere. We need to discuss this in a calm way. And finally, the most important part is we are going to stay at the relationship at one country, two systems. We are making efforts together to make Hong Kong better, and also the Hong Kong's tomorrow holds in the majority people's hands. They need to stand out to try to get their voice clear. What are they truly need, and back to the society to normal. And that is the only right way to get things back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much from both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.